Another Chinese repair. You see the cap is kind of crushed. I think they said it fell off the table, it landed on the top. It's got some damage around one side and damage around the other side where I guess it hit the table and bounced off. This being Chinese made. Now this one in particular, this one's actually got a bead on it. Okay, a fairly nice bead, so it's probably an early one. You know, as time wore on and they started really mass producing the crap out of these things, a lot of times, you know, it almost looks like they wiped the solder on. You can actually see the space in between the copper foiled pieces, like, you know, it looks almost like they just tinned it. You know, the other thing that a lot of folks seem to have problems with, you know, because it is a Chinese made shade, so it is foreign, meaning that more than likely they're using lead-free solder because of international conditions of some kind, right? So, you know, like I say, this one has a bead. Now, you'll notice what I did was I just have a very coarse wire wheel on my drill that I just take to help it knock off some, okay, just knock off some of the patina that's on, okay. And people go, oh my God, you're going to scratch the glass. Well, it's already a repair, A. B, I'm just knocking some of the patina off. I'm not bearing down on it like I'm trying to grind the crap out of something. So, first thing I got to do is take this cap off. Well, the easiest way to take the cap off is to take a propane torch and play it around the cap, not the glass. Play it around the cap, because what will happen is the cap will get nice and hot. Okay, the cap is going to get nice and hot, and the heat, because it's brass, theoretically, is going to conduct down to where it's been soldered. Okay, that's the whole idea. Alright, this is really the easiest way to get these caps off of here, you know, because trying to get it off with an iron could take you a couple of hours at least. So you play it around. Just take a couple of minutes, slowly play it around, and the cap is going to conduct the heat down to where it's been soldered. Even though, like I say, you know, they're using lead-free on these shades they're making, and that has a lot to do with how much of a pain in the tail it is to repair these things, because, you know, a lot of people go into, you know, into repairs with a bad case of the supposed tos. You know, like you're supposed to be able to take your iron and just touch it to the solder and it's going to melt off. See, look, see that came right off. Shut the torch off. And the lead, the solder is kind of chunky. It's kind of chunky funky. See how kind of dull that is? You know, so that shows me that it's lead free at the very least. And the other thing, let me get something over here. It doesn't hurt to keep blocks of wood around from time to time, like these things that I've got here. Let's see if I can get this in frame. Alright. So I've got my iron nice and hot, hopefully. And I'm not a big fan of busting the glass out of anything, especially stuff like this. You know, because to bust the glass out of something like this, you almost would need to be using a nail punch. But the thing with the supposed tos is that because this is lead-free solder, at least that's my theory. Okay, because it is lead-free solder, it's not going to melt immediately when you touch your iron to it. That's a bad case of the supposed tos. Supposed to be able to touch your iron to it, it's just going to melt right off. Well, it doesn't. You wind up having to use some good solder on your tip to get the lead-free stuff to melt and at least run out or down. Okay. And sometimes when you bust the glass out, especially of a lampshade like this, you bust the glass out, the hole that's left is not necessarily the hole that the glass filled. Okay? So, I'm trying to melt off part of the bead, because I'm going to be using tweezers. Now these are just hooked tweezers. You know, I've seen the videos on how they make these things, which is really interesting. Some of us could take a lesson on how they make these things, because they don't use a mold to set the glass onto. They use a mold that they set the glass into, almost like a third of a bowl. Now that would mean that they would have had to had made an entire shade as a model to be able to make the mold, which is like 1/3 of a bowl. You know, to take a plaster cast of it, as in like 1/3. So they, you know, they actually cut out all of the glass and they copper foil it, and then they set it in the bowl in thirds and then solder the inside first. And then when they had the 2/3, then they put the 2/3 together and solder at the seam, then you have a shape. So, and watching the ladies foil these things, they don't use scissors. I'm not even sure if they burnished it down or not. They actually wrap it around and then just tear it off. So the copper foil they're using is very, very, very thin. Now for my purposes, I'll wind up using a glove, because I'm going to wind up pushing the glass out from the inside. Which is just what has to happen. If it works. Right. So, okay. So I had to use a screwdriver to get that out. Okay. The other thing is, I'm using these hooked tweezers, is getting, and again, having to have some solder on the tip so it can run down onto the copper foil, so I can get at least get it started. To be able to pull out or pull off the copper foil without pulling it off the adjacent piece. Alright? Because that's another pain in the ass can of worms. Which is why I use the tweezers. Okay? Just to get it off without pulling it off the adjacent piece. And it's tricky to get started. I know, you know, because of the way they foil these things, you know, they just tear it off. It doesn't always come off as one piece. You wind up having to get it off. See, here we go, bit by bit. And I think part of that is because they have tweaked it so much so that their copper foil is actually thinner. Not so much the width, but it is the thickness. So that's very easy to tear while you're trying to get it off or out. So, okay. So again, cleaning out the hole is very important, and cleaning it out without tearing the foil off the adjacent piece is very important. Because I don't know about you, but looking at this hole, trying to foil the inside of a hole like this, to me, is a giant pain in the tail. At least for me. I don't want to have to try to copper foil the inside of something like this that I've got my iron stuck into because I'm in such a hurry to get it cleaned out. See? See? You know, that's another thing about those supposed to's. Yeah. So I'll save some of, I've got a little piece of the glass that came out from way over here. And yeah, I can stick paper behind there. Alright. And that's one thing you can do to get part of the size, part of the shape, is to take a piece of, even a piece of heavy cardstock. Scrap paper. Could have had that handy, but I didn't, you know. And a decent pencil. Heavy cardstock. Paper, put it up behind the hole. See? You see this? That keeps it somewhat stiff behind it. So there's my piece I got to replace on that one. And I got two here, 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 and here to get out. This one's intact, this one's intact. I think there's a little crack in this one I may have to replace. Then I can work on